culture with a small c. They would drag me around endless blooming exhibitions and country houses in Britain and concerts and art galleries and things, which of course, age 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, I thought was so boring. And, but theatre was the one that really struck a chord with me. And it was only in my later teenage years when I began to meet other children from other walks of life, other backgrounds, when I joined a thing called the National Youth Theatre, which brought kids from all over the country and from all backgrounds together, did I realize how fortunate I was, that so many thousands of kids did not have that cultural hum. And that's, I think my gratitude is sort of explained a bit in the book.
The gratitude is the context that I think the entire book unfolds in. It is so clear and so warm. It's really lovely.
Oh, that's very kind of you. Thank you. There's also funny bits, don't worry.
The title, Playing Under the Piano. I know you say, and you said that, you just thought you would string some anecdotes together. I think you did a lot more. I think you're underselling, but I do wonder where the title, the first part of the title, we'll get to the second part in just a second, but Playing Under the Piano.
Well, really, it comes from a memory. On one level, it comes from a memory when I was at nursery school. And I have an image, a strong image of myself under this upright piano in the corner of the classroom, playing with a toy of some sort, be it an action man or, I don't know, some toy, and being asked to go out and do my bit in front of the class, perform a piece or whatever it might have been, and feeling this strange awkwardness about that actually it was better to play under the piano. And then at the same time, I was being drawn out into the spotlight. I knew that I loved doing that too. And I think that sort of tension has hung around me all my life, that it's a thing I love doing, but is it really a job? It's a fun piece of self-expression, but is it a career? Well, clearly it is. But I found it a strange sort of push and pull within me all my life. The other reason is that my father was a wonderful pianist. And as he took on that journey into dementia, as so many of you will know, music and the ability to connect through music stays so much longer than other faculties. And sometimes as he was later on in life, when he was still living in his own apartment, I would go around to have a coffee with him or something, and I would pause outside his living room door just to listen to him playing, because that's when he was still most himself. And I'd go in and he'd sort of immediately stop playing and go, "Oh, here you are, let's have a cup of tea," or something. You would enter then the sort of sometimes funny, sometimes painful dynamic of dementia and the encounter with the person who has it. But playing the piano really was a great joy for me to listen to.
So the book, as you know, because you're holding copies, Playing Under the Piano, From Downton to Darkest Peru. I thought the second part was just a tad misleading because obviously your career does not begin in September of 2010 when Downton drops. So there is so much more, and I found, and you will find as you're reading this, the name drops are awesome. I mean, you've got Julia Roberts, Leonardo DiCaprio, Bob Hoskins. Who writes a book where they can talk about their interaction with Laurence Olivier? All right. You've got Benedict Cumberbatch, Dame Judi Dench. How did you decide who got to make an appearance and what story you wanted to tell?
I rang their agents and said, how much are they, how much are they willing to pay? I mean, all the names you've mentioned there, some of whom I had close encounters with and others less so, but they happen actually, as you reeled them off, all to be people I admire hugely, and some of whom have had a profound impact on my life, either accidentally or by through the process of my working with them. Judi Dench, for example, who obviously is a national treasure in Britain, and I'm sure is known to, and many, most of you, I would imagine. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of nods here. I was a very, very nervous young actor at the National Theatre in London, and it was my first job with her. And I was waiting in the wings of the rehearsal space, about to come on, and I had the script in my hand, and she was there rehearsing a scene with another actor, and my hands were shaking, and the script was flapping around, like this, and she was standing over here, and she'd been doing the scene, and she's clocked me, And then she did something which I have never forgotten. She did the opposite of upstaging. Upstaging is when the actor gradually gets more and more up here, so the audience keeps looking at them. She did the opposite. She went all the way downstage and turned her back to the audience and literally gave me the stage. I was this nervous young boy, and that was about the most generous act a senior actor could do for a young buck like me, and I've always treasured that.
That is awesome. I must admit, when you got to Julia Roberts, I was holding my breath. Please don't let her be a jerk. Please don't let her be a jerk. And I don't want to, it's always tricky in these things. You want to show enough leg to read the book, or that they'll buy the book, but they've already bought the book, so this isn't an issue. But you don't want to give away too much. Can you just share the Olivier story with us?
Oh, that was simply that my father, being a surgeon, he had many clients from patients from different walks of life, and one of them happened to be a theatrical agent called Laurie Evans, who had set up ICM, which became a big agency in America as well. And he had clients like, I don't know if actors' names like Ralph Richardson and Rex Harrison and people like that. They were on his roster. And my father, having operated on Laurie Evans, the agent, became a family friend of theirs. And they used to hold parties in the summer, Laurie and his wife Mary, as well as in the winter. And one Christmas, when I was, I think, still at university, they said, we've been invited to Laurie and Mary's party, will you come? And I thought, no. Anyway, it was snowing, and I thought, oh, I might as well. There's nothing in the fridge, and so I tagged along, and we arrived at Laurie's beautiful 17th century house in the middle of the Surrey Hills in south of London, and the snow was falling, and I got out of the car, and just ahead of me was an old man being helped by a nurse up to the front door, and I could see he was about to try and reach for the bell pull, and so I nipped ahead and pulled the bell pull myself and turned around, and he said, "Thank you so much, Olivier," and he put his hand out, and I, of course, was completely starstruck. It turned out the lunch party, was a buffet, and my parents disappeared, and I got my plate and was looking for somewhere to sit, and I realized that Laurence Olivier and Laurie, our host, were sitting at the end of the kitchen table. And so I thought, I'm never going to get to see this man ever again. So I plonked myself at the other end and sort of watched them, really. And they started singing these really dirty music hall songs. I felt like I died and gone to heaven.
You write at one point with a very understandable but slight bit of irritation that you get this comment from time to time, "Oh, you must be so grateful Downton came along." As if the preceding quarter century was, in your words, a painful slog towards hell. Because it wasn't, because you had a very impressive career prior to Downton. But I am curious, since the last dozen years, you've become this supercharged, bold-faced name. How does what I would imagine every young actor feels, this, God, one day, maybe one day. How does the reality of now being in the place you dreamed about match up to what you were envisioning as a young actor?
Well, the first thing I would say about that question is that I've never wanted to be famous. I never wanted to be a star in the traditional, I want to go to Hollywood and make my name and all that. I just wanted to be an actor, a stage actor. That was my passion. I grew up watching plays in London and wanting to be a part of the National Theatre Company or the Royal Shakespeare Company, and I did achieve that, and that was perhaps my happy place in terms of my theatre work. And so I never thought for a second that I would be in front of a camera. I had this naive calculation in my head that the Brits were quite good at stage work, but the Americans did camera work. That was the sort of strange thing I had in my head. Of course, it's not true. Acting is acting. It's just, different. You're pushing different buttons at different times. But I never thought I'd be a screen actor, and so when it gradually started to happen, it was almost accidental, and was only because I failed to have my contract renewed at the Royal Shakespeare Company. I thought my career's over, that's it, and it's all downhill from here. And then I started to get TV work, and Kenneth Branagh actually gave me a tiny role in my first film, Frankenstein, that he'd produced and directed. And then that led to other little bits and bobs, and so it grew. And yes, of course, Downton was a big gear changer, but But when it happens, it's strange. And after, the first season that we did Downton Abbey, I mean, we were all contracted to do 3 seasons with an option on, being on the producer's side, not on ours. So we had to do 3 years. But as the executive producer, Gareth Neame, said to me, he said, well, look, we all know it'll only run 1 season because these things do. The option is just a joke. Well, we did 6 in the end and 2 movies. So it's, you never know. But what was interesting was that at the end of the first season of Downton, and when it came towards broadcast, it was very hard to get any press to look at it because costume dramas were dead in the UK. It didn't find an audience here, it didn't find a home here in the US. Only PBS put their hands up and said, well, we'll have it because nobody else wants it. And as we all know, PBS doesn't have a lot of money, and so they did quite well out of it in the long run. But what we did find once it came to season 2 was that suddenly this thing had mushroomed. And so we all had to close in around each other and protect each other a bit because it was strange the way that it amplified so rapidly and literally pulling paparazzi out of trees when they were trying to film us. And it got a bit strange, but we all looked after each other.
But we live in a bizarro world where fame is what it is, whether it was what you set out to earn or not. So at this point, how famous are you? No, I mean, I get whatever table I want in a restaurant famous? Is it like what's changed in your life?
Well, I don't know, it's strange. I don't, I mean, we still manage to live, we live down in the countryside in England. We have a fairly quiet and normal life there, but we do have a good code in my family to do with recognition in public spaces. We have, initially we have the supermarket turn, which means we were in a supermarket, and our intent, all 3 in my family, we're quite good at recognizing when someone's clocked you. And it's usually when you're walking down the freezer aisle, someone's walking down the freezer aisle, and you see Mr. Grab Mrs. and say, don't look round. I said, don't look round. So there's that. Then we have the zoo, which is, I can remember looking in a shop window and someone coming up and going, yeah, it is him. And then we have, what was the other one? We have, we had the bum shifter, which was in a restaurant, and Mrs. says to Mr., don't look behind you, but there's that bloke off that TV show, and he went, no idea. So there is that, and I mean, but the funniest thing is that, of course, Downton and Paddington and other projects have made me familiar to many people, and often it's, were you at Sylvia's wedding? We met at Sylvia's wedding, didn't we? But that's now become less and less, and more people recognizing me from a particular show. But as the actor Robert James Collier, who played Thomas the footman in Downton Abbey, as he brilliantly said, he said, in America, people cross the street to tell you how much they love the show, which is great. In Britain, they cross the street to tell you they don't watch it.
So, Sophia Loren once told me, and the whole night's been the whole night has been leading up to this. Marcia said, will you come interview? I said, of course, I get to tell the Sophia Loren story. But we were doing a piece for Sunday morning. I said, do you go to dinner when you're in New York? I'm just curious. She said, yeah, I go to dinner. I said, do you get interrupted at dinner? She said, yeah, I get interrupted at dinner. I said, what do you do? She said, I try to remember the 30 seconds out of my life is a lifetime memory for them. Oh. She gave me a kiss I didn't wash for 2 weeks. But I think that was like 10 or 15 years, I've never forgotten it. You do also probably have the lovely chance to interact with people, well-meaning, not the zanies, who just want to say thank you. You've enhanced their lives, you've enriched their lives. And that must be an amazingly wonderful experience for you.
It is, and there have been so many times in my life where I've sort of, as I've said, thought, prancing around in tights, is that a job for a real person, and it's a bit silly what we do when there's so much strife in the world, but the number of, particularly with Downton Abbey, the number of letters we all received and notes and online interactions saying how much the show has meant to people and how it brought a family together on a Sunday evening or whatever. And interestingly, the pandemic, there was a whole new wave of watching it. I mean, we'd broadcast the last show in the US, I think it was in 2016. So, that's a long time ago. And we've been having messages recently, people saying, I watched it again during the pandemic or whatever. And it's reminded me of the time I watched it with my late grandfather, grandmother, mother's daughter, whatever. And it meant so much to us then, and it means so much to us now. And I think also now there's a sort of nostalgia for that era, dare I say it, certainly pre-Brexit in Britain, when things were a little calmer and people were a little more tolerant of each other.
Why do you think it struck such a chord here? You have this British upper crust family, and I understand a little bit of the nostalgia in Great Britain. Why did it hit here the way it did?
Gosh, I wish I knew the answer to that, Jim. The fact is that it's worked. It's gone down well in every single country that it's played in, which is all over the world. And I mean, I've even had letters from China saying it's such a wonderful, fascinating representation of our own society. I was thinking, what? But I do think I put it down really to the writing and also to my own memory of reading the first episode, in that I wanted to know what happens next, and I I was interested in the characters that had been presented to me, and they were vivid. So often when you read a script, you can hide the name of the protagonist and you don't know which character is speaking. In Downton, from the get-go, you could tell there was a different voice. Each character had a voice, had a natural voice, and they weren't cast when I first read it, but they popped like when you read a novel. You cast them in your head, and these people, to the extent that after I'd had my meeting with Julian Fellows, the author, and Gareth, after that, I said, by the way, who are you thinking of to play Violet, Lady Crawley, the mother? And they said, well, we're hoping Maggie Smith. And I said, good luck with that. You're not going to get her. So why did it hit? I think, and I go back to the writing. Julian Fellows says he always tries to write from the premise that people try to be good. They may do wrong things, but they try to be good. And in this world of Downton, he said it's one of the few precincts that can legitimately exist. The country house between the wall, where you can see every level of society in one place legitimately, like you can in a hospital or a police station, which is why so many shows are, understandably created in those environments. Arguably, you could say an airport too, but then that's so transitory. So I think his ability to, or his choice to see the good in people, I think that comes through in Downton. However much skullduggery and bad behavior there may be, 90% of the time people are trying to get by and do good. And I think we all can recognize that.
I want to circle back to the part of your life where you were deciding this was what you wanted to do. And as you say, the idea wasn't to be a star, it was to be a craftsman, to be a working actor. And I'm just wondering, as a way that may be instructive to other either parents of prospective actors, or if we have some in the room, how much doubt did you have that you would be able, maybe you didn't envision this, but that you would work as an actor? And what did you do with that doubt?
It's interesting. I think I had plenty of doubt, but I felt I had no choice. so that when I talk to young actors or aspiring actors now, or people who say they want to be actors or go into the arts in some way, the creative arts, I always say, if you've got a choice, if you've got a number of things that you're considering, and if ever they say, well, maybe I'm thinking about law and I'm thinking maybe about journalism, and of course acting is an option, I say, well, do the other two, because acting has to be a compulsion, because you are going to get rejected 90% of the time, certainly when you're starting out. And I suppose I've erased, I think, like you erase so many negatives, you erase all the bad auditions, you erase all the rejections. And so I can't quite remember how I equipped myself, but I was pragmatic. I did say, in those days you needed in England an equity card to become an actor, a union ticket. And I did say to myself and to my family, who were, supportive of what I was doing, I said, I'm going to be realistic. I had intended to train as a lawyer, but I thought, I want to give this a go, because I'd rather spend 3 years trying than 40 years in a pinstripe suit wondering if I could have done it. So I gave myself 3 years to get my equity card. And if I didn't get that, then I felt that the profession, for whatever reason, was probably telling me something, and I would go and do something else. But I was very fortunate and got my card.
And so the wonderful parents who introduced you to Culture with a Small C, you tell them this is what I'm doing, and it was go get it? It
was, they were slightly sailing blind because, being medics, they had one friend in the profession. And actually, this is another thing I talk to young people about. So they said, we don't have any advice to give you. We don't have any magic wands to wave. We don't know how it works. But we do have one friend, one family friend, who works as an agent's assistant and had done for many years. And so I went to talk to her. I didn't know her really, but and at that stage I'd been offered an equity card with a little traveling troupe of players that would go around schools and do Shakespeare in schools and doing truncated Shakespeare. And the other was in effect holding a spear at the back of a stage in an open air theatre in London. And she said, I have absolutely no doubt about what you should do. You should go and do the touring project in schools, because you will interact with children, you will learn your craft with the hardest audience that you will ever come across, and you will cut your teeth on some Shakespeare. And I said, thank you so much, Anne, that's incredibly useful to have that advice. And I did exactly the opposite. And so I always say again to young people, listen to advice, but you have to follow your own instinct.
There is another lovely vignette in the book where you're addressing this topic, and you're talking, I guess it was 2003, and you're doing the scene with an actress named Wanda Ventham, and she's talking about her son, whose acting career is beginning to explode, and your reaction was, another misguided young fool, hard cut.
Benedict Cumberbatch.
Which leads me to asking you this question. If you buy the premise that no one fails, they just stop trying, have you seen talented men and women training as actors who just didn't make it? Should have made it just as good as people who did make it, but didn't make it.
Absolutely, yeah. I was at drama school. I didn't go to drama school for very long. I did a postgraduate year, but left when I got offered this hallowed equity card. But my goodness me, there were half a dozen people in my class who were way more talented than me. And so much luck comes into this industry. I happened to get my equity card because my letter arrived on the director's desk at a certain day. He was in a good mood. It was out of season. He decided to audition me. But so many of my colleagues from that vintage, from that year group, did not get the breaks. It's all about the lucky breaks. Just one example of that. My very first job was understudying Ralph Fiennes in a play at the Regent's Park Theatre in London. And he was playing Lysander in the Midsummer Night's Dream, and I was playing a cymbal at the back of the stage. I wasn't even a bloody fairy. And but then we took the play on tour around Europe that summer, and he was promoted to play Oberon, King of the Fairies, and so I took over as Lysander. And it so happened, as we were flying into Florence Airport, there was a guy in the next line who I recognized as a well-known director and actor himself, who was working at the time at the National Theatre, one of our hallowed institutions. And he happened to be on a mini break, a weekend break, and he knew a couple of people in the cast. And so he came to see the show, and so he let it be known that he thought I was okay, I was good in it. And so, my friend said, oh yes, he really liked you. You should write to him at the National Theatre. And so I wrote to him at the National Theatre, and he said, yes, I did think you were good in the show, and I can get you an audition at the theatre. And so I went to the National Theatre, where I then started to cut my teeth and learn my craft there. Had he chosen to go to Milan for the weekend, there are so many pieces of luck that the sliding doors, turning left and right, what are the choices, and where would we have ended up if the butterfly hadn't battered its wings in the jungle?
We like to think luck is the residue of design, but sometimes you need to catch lightning in a bottle.
You do have to catch lightning in a bottle, but I always again say to younger actors that you've more chance of fulfilling your dreams if you at least put yourself in the orbit of possibility. If you're working in the scene dock or in the, selling ice creams in the theater or working in the box office, you have more chance than if you're working in as I think I put it, a carpet factory in Kidderminster, miles out of the range, where you can then sit by a telephone and get cross that nobody's ringing you. Nobody owes you a living in this business, unfortunately. You have to make it yourself, and you have to sometimes make your own opportunity.
My children are so sick of so much of what I say, but the harder I work, the luckier I get. That's a good one.
That's a good one.
And
yeah,
I think there's some truth to it. Let's talk about chapter 33. This was. This is the quiz part of the night. You go to Hollywood. Yes. It is one of my favorite examinations of the plasticity of that city that I've ever read. It was fantastic. Can you just share a little bit about what your experience was?
Well, it was so naive. I was so naive. This is 2005, and I'd been in LA only once or twice before, and I'd gone for a particular project, what they call a table read of a sitcom I was attached to, which didn't go anywhere. But I didn't understand, never heard of pilot season or anything like that. And my agent said, before you fly home, would you go and read for this particular show? And I'm on my way to the airport having read for the show. It was a really funny script, which was quite good for a sitcom. And he called me up and said, turn around, they want you to come and read with the star, Jenna Elfman, the next day. And before I knew it, I was on my knees, literally on my knees at CBS, signing away 7 years of my life,
It happens.
King of CBS. And so this was in the spring, and then in the fall we were to come back if the pilot got picked up, which indeed it did. And so I naively, brought my wonderful wife Lulu, who's here with me tonight, and our 3-year-old son over to LA, and we'd done all the wrong things. We'd rented a tiny little, sweet little English-looking cottage with no air conditioning and no yard for our toddler, and we arrived at sort of 9 o'clock at night, and we walked into this little house, and there was a huge picture of a scary military figure with a saber drawn or something. Felix burst into tears. We were, jet lagged. By 2:30 a.m., we decided we had to move out, because the jet lag was kicking in. And then as I was getting the hire car the next morning, the producer from the show rang and said, we're going on hiatus. And up to that point, I'd never heard the word apart from in relation to a hernia. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, we had to let the showrunner go, the producer-writer. I said, what, the guy who created the damn thing? And she said, yeah, we've had to let him go. I said, you mean you fired him? No, we had to let him, he's gone. And so that was my first instance of the buck being passed. No one would take responsibility for saying we've actually fired the guy. Anyway, it was a long and convoluted story, and it ended up with us sitting there. We moved out of this one house, had to rent another. I was renting 2 houses for a little while. And of course, you're only paid per episode produced. There was no episodes being produced. So I was hemorrhaging money in Hollywood, and everyone saying, but Hugh, what's the problem? The sun's shining. I was going, I'm going mad here. Poor Lulu was going around the twist. We had a 3-year-old who we were meant to be there for just a couple of months. Suddenly we had to find a school. You try finding a school in LA for toddlers. We went to one place, and they said not even the Douglases could get a place here. And it went around this sort of vortex of pain, And it was all symbolized, actually. One evening, we were renting this house, so we had no vested interest in this house. It was a lovely house in Hancock, in Larchmont. And I'd noticed as we'd traversed this hallway from the kitchen right through to the terrace out at the back of the house, there was a peanut on the floor, and I'd passed it for probably 3 days, and it got crunched, and it was sitting there, and I thought, and I got another bottle of wine and went and joined Lulu on the terrace, and after about 3 days of this, we were getting more and more depressed by the whole experience of sitting there, and she said, I see the peanut's still there, and I said, yeah, I know. She said, look, this isn't my house, this isn't my life, this is just, as it was absolutely perfect image of our life there. It was a crunched peanut in a carpet, on a carpet that wasn't even ours. Anyway, we did eventually limp through the show, and I have to say, I did have a wonderful team of friends on the show, and we worked hard, and Jenna worked really hard, but the show just never took off, and there were all sorts of levels of suits and infrastructure at the corporate level that make me shudder even to this day. So I came home vowing I'd never work in Hollywood again, but of course time heals all wounds.
I would say. All right, this next one is actually for my mother. Now, you don't know my mother, but if...
I've met her, she's gorgeous, she's here.
Thank you. I guess the best description is take the Dowager Countess Violet Crawley and reinvent her as a Jewish-American matriarch in Montclair who likes Rosarios a little too much. If she, we talk about this, is in love with Dame Maggie Smith. So I don't really have a very complicated question other than what is it like to work with her?
Oh dear. She is, of course, an amazing woman, and so often one uses the tennis analogies of if you're going to go and play with Chris Evert or Roger Federer, you better bring your best tennis racket and your neatest outfit and play your best game, because she damn well will just by doing a simple lob. She has an innate talent that has been nurtured over decades. And when we started the show, she was in her mid to late 70s, I guess. So in her mid to late 80s, when we did the second movie. And I can remember, I felt, and this is no secret, I think I said in the book, I was as intimidated and intrigued by her and impressed by her on my last day as I was on my first. I mean, really, she's so mercurial. And there'd be days when she was feeling frail and cross with herself if she wasn't hitting it right. And so the producing team had to work out the best way to get the best Maggie, which was probably in the middle of the day, so she wasn't being called too early or working too late. But she adored the girls particularly. So Laura Carmichael, Lady Edith, would spend hours showing her cat videos in the corner. And we had a game of a bit like Scrabble called Bananagrams, which we played relentlessly in the little green room when we came off set. And even during the dining room scenes, which take forever because of the number of camera angles you have to set up around that dinner table, in between times when it wasn't worth it to go offset, we'd stay there around the table for 10 minutes or so, and we'd play games. And one of them was Wink Murder, so that we'd get one of the mustard pots and put in it. Let's say there are 10 of us around the table, 10 bits of paper, one of which has the cross on it, meaning you're the murderer. And the challenge is that you then have to wink at someone across the table, and they have to die in an elaborate fashion without anybody else noticing that you've been, that you are the murderer, until eventually someone goes, "J'accuse, I saw you wink," And so that was fun. And Maggie was particularly good at it. So on her final day, in the final dining room scene when we wrapped, Elizabeth McGovern, who played Cora, my wife, she presented her with a silver mustard pot as a memento. But she could, as we all know, she could, deliver those zingers that Julian, wrote for her time after time with such panache and unique quality. Her inflections are often the ones you don't expect, and that's what turns the line and polishes it anew. And she could equally find great pathos in a scene that you hadn't anticipated. And in fact, one of the most moving moments I found from her performance was in season 3, after Sybil's death, and the house is in mourning, and there's just a shot of her walking across the hallway to go and be with the family and be the matriarch, and the strong matriarch, and she flinches on the way. And you see the utter vulnerability of this woman. I can't even remember if the suggestion was in the script, but she flinched in a way that you knew she was going through enormous pain, the character, and that she was then going to go in and be the strong dowager that she needed to be. A remarkable actress.
I want to save a few minutes for a few questions from the audience. Let me just ask this last one, though, before we go to questions from the floor. And this is, I think, runs through your entire book. And essentially, for me, what made it just so lovely was your very honest human moments that great success as an actor doesn't change. You talk about the roles, even after you were Hugh Bonneville, that you didn't get. You wanted a Game of Thrones role, you didn't get it. Boys in the Boat, you wanted to play John Adams, or at least somebody wanted you to play John Adams, you thought. Does it still sting?
You mean the rejections? Oh, well, for all that I say that one has to have a thick and a thin skin as an actor, the thick skin to cope with the rejection. I always think of that wonderful opening sequence in Tootsie when Dustin Hoffman's doing all these auditions off Broadway or on the stage. and you hear this voice from the auditorium, you know, behind the lights going, no, next we need something, you know, saying, I can be taller, I can be shorter, I can be, you know, eventually the director just says, well, we just want someone else. And of course, for however much you say, well, that's fine, the arrows can bounce off me, I've got armor, I'm an armadillo here, I can poof. Of course, occasionally one just goes, and you think, oh, I could have done that role. John Adams, no, he was 5'6", and I kept being told that, oh, we can dig a trench, don't worry, you know, you'll be fine. And I was thinking, no, it's not going to work. So that one I didn't regret.
I do think it's, again, one of the great relatable parts of what you're writing about is, I think everybody has a version of, you can't earn your way out of, you can't earn your way into perpetual happiness. You can't achieve your way into perpetual happiness. That it's very human, no matter who you are, even a movie star, there still is the sting of rejection on the menu of what you confront in life.
Yeah, that's true. But it is part of life, and we all have to learn to live with it. It's like death.
All right. I don't know, do we have a mic? We do have a mic, and we must have a question. Can I get a hand up right there, Marcia? Do you see the... Marcia's going to pick who she wants anyway.
Is it on? Yeah.
Well, welcome. And I want to know, what else do you notice about the difference in the audience in England as opposed to audiences in the United States?
Oh, that's a good question. You're my first audience in the United States. I mean, so you're the best. What I will say is that, I mean, I'm so used to talking about a collaborative project, be it Downton Abbey or Paddington or some other project, and I'm used to having a team with me to bounce off and to pass the buck to or the ball to. So to be here talking about my own stuff is very, very strange and unusual, and I wasn't sure how an American audience would respond to the conversation we've had, you know, which would be very different to audiences back in the UK. But I'm delighted to say we are all bound by the same humanity, so that's nice to know.
Where do you go? You have an interesting 48 hours in front of you.
Oh yes, tomorrow. Yes, so tomorrow we're going to Washington D.C. And Politics and Prose. One of the great event there. And then for various logistical reasons, which are just slightly frustrating, we're coming all the way back to New York to a Barnes & Noble event in Union Square on Thursday. But it's great. It's a very short, because I'm in the middle of a book tour in England, Stratford-on-Avon last week and Cambridge University next weekend, I could only squeeze in these few days. So just by happenstance, but it's great to be here. And I have to say, I'm very relieved that you've laughed and been quiet in the places that were appropriate. So we do speak the same language. That's great.
That makes two of us. Another question?
Hello, Hugh. Thank you for being here. I'm going to be one of those aforementioned lovely people who say thank you for a small moment in your life that had a big impact on my family. Several years ago, you were kind enough to dump a bucket of ice water over your head for the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge, which at the time, and then all your castmates, you know, got involved. And at the time, I thought that was adorable and cute. 7 months later, my brother was diagnosed with ALS.
Oh, so sorry.
In the years since, I have lost both of my siblings to a disease we knew nothing about while you were doing the Ice Bucket Challenge. So I want to say thank you, because I know there's probably so many charities and good causes, and you support tons of them, and I see you doing them on social media. But I want to make sure that you know that you are appreciated for those small moments that you give time to good causes or passion projects, because they directly affect families like mine, because that Ice Bucket Challenge, for instance, raised enough money not to have a cure, but to give the future generations of my family hope. So, you know, you do something for fun, and I'm sure everybody's always tugging at you, you know, to do these things, and it's a time suck from you and your family, but it's very, very meaningful, and I want you to know it's noticed. And I'm curious how you choose those. There is a question here, I promise. How do you choose of all the things that you get pulled to do, and causes to support, how can you possibly pick them?
Well, thank you first of all. It's nice to know that, and I'm sorry for your losses. It's hard. I've sort of got I've made a firmer rule to do with the main charities I'm involved with, which are those that I can understand and relate to. So that's why I support a lot of children and the arts, because as I said earlier, I'm incredibly conscious of how fortunate I was, and I'm also conscious of how little in the state sector, particularly the state education system, how little exposure to the arts there is in the UK. So I align myself with those charities in particular, and also these days, ones that aren't too geographically challenging, so I don't have to go too far from home. That's a simple answer, but there are other qualifications along the way that, also the mood I'm in that day, whatever. But I try and do a bit, but you can't spread yourself too thin, and it's not fair on the family, as you say, and others.
Thank you so much for that. I want to say thank you. I do wonder why we have such an issue, both sides of the Atlantic, with funding the arts. You make a point of, I think it was one of the schools where they had every kind of sports you're describing, and then nothing for the theater. And it's maddening here too. I mean, what's wrong with us could take us the rest of the night, but why don't we get it?
I think partly, I mean, it's been a slow decline since, I mean, I've got no figures, but it's anecdotally, I sense that it's been a decline in as being part of the curriculum in the UK over the last 25 years, probably. This school you were mentioning, I bring it up in the book, had literally no music facilities whatsoever, and it was a brand new school. It had been literally purpose-built, and there was no rehearsal space, no performance space, and certainly no musical instruments, and that's criminal. In the UK, we are proud of the fact that we have a multi-billion-pound industry. It's the soft diplomacy that our culture brings around the world, and the talent that we have, both on screen and off, and on stage and off, and in the music world as well, is almost incomparable. It's certainly something we should be proud of, but it's got to start at the grassroots. It's got to start with the children, and I think partly because you can't quantify it. You can't quantify how our spirits are lifted, how our souls are nourished, be it by literature, by art, by music. Whereas, of course, we can quantify engine parts, we can quantify medical assistance, we can, so I think it may be something to do with that it doesn't tick as many boxes that we can actually correlate from year to year or check against from year to year. But it makes us better human beings to be exposed at some level to the creative industries, the creative arts, and we need them for the future. Anyway.
Very well said. Another question.
I'm really curious, when you do a play, you have an arc of a character and you know where it's going. If you do a film, you know where that's going. But when you do a series and you, as you said, you thought, oh, it's going to be just one season, you could see the season. How did you work to shape Lord Grantham over the years? Did you work with Julian Fellowes? Did you have any input in that?
It's a very interesting acting question, actually, and it came up a couple of times. I will answer the question, but I sort of deflect to Lady Edith, Laura again, because there was an actor, Charlie Edwards, who played her first love interest, and it was the father of her child in the show, and he went off to Germany, and he went off to do a job at the National Theatre, actually, but anyway, he went off. He went off to Germany, and it was always hinted that he might come back, or there was uncertainty about where he was and was he coming back, and there was the rise of fascism, and it was all very, and Laura kept saying to Julian, I need to, is he coming back, because I need to know whether, how to play this. And eventually Julian got so frustrated with her, he said, we don't even know what's going to happen after tea, so you can't play the future. I mean, unless you suddenly discover that your character is Italian and you hadn't realized that, and maybe you should have had an accent or something like that. But on the whole, in a series like that, you just have to play the moment, and that came home to me in a play as well.
And that leads to what I think you described as the most liberating acting note you've ever received, which is an actor's instinct is to advance smoothly from point A to point B. Life isn't like that. So play the moment.
Yeah. Absolutely. It came in a rehearsal where I was playing a scene with my brother in the show, and we had we were grown men. He was a mayor. I was a sort of whistleblower in the town, and we were having this squat. And the way we rehearsed it, we just ended up being squabbling brothers. It was like watching two 10-year-olds, and it was very funny. At the end of the play, my character's in a deeply dark, emotional place. It's a play called Enemy of the People by Ibsen, and I said to the director at one point, but hang on, you know, we've had our fun in rehearsal, but let's face it, we can't really do that because he ends up like that. And he said, but you know, life is like that. You might have your telephone voice for your bank, and you have the way you talk to your kids. We all behave differently in different circumstances, and we never know what's coming around the corner. Play the moment, play now. And that was as true in Downton Abbey as it is in that play. And it was a very, very good and liberating note.
Absolutely. Good life advice. We have time for one more question. Sir.
So Downton, Notting Hill, which I confess I've probably seen maybe 10 times beginning 20 years ago. Can you share any stories about making that film? Was it fun to make the film?
Oh,
anything you can share that no one else would know?
Well, just I think a couple of I have hugely fond memories of that because it was my first decent role in a movie. Most of it's on the cutting room floor. Most of all our parts, the supporting parts, are on the cutting room floor. A wonderful British actor you may know called Toby Jones is in it, except he's not in it. And you know that's the plight of the actor on a movie. You never know if you're going to survive. But I suppose there's one story worth telling about how my character Bernie doesn't know that Julia Roberts is the most famous film star in the world, which indeed she was at the time. And sorry. Yes. Well, the scene of the dinner party where Hugh Grant brings Julia Roberts, Anna Scott in the movie, to have dinner with his gang of close friends. That was the seed. That was the first idea that Richard Curtis had, because he had a group of buddies from Oxford, and they used to meet after they'd left the university, and they'd eat dinner maybe once a year at their friend Piers's house. Piers was the worst cook in the world, and he'd burn everything, but that didn't matter because it was their friendship that mattered and sustained. And he thought, what if I took the most famous girl in the world to dinner? How would each of them react? And that was the idea. That was the original idea. And of course, my character is playing this lousy stockbroker who loses, you know, millions of pounds a day, and turns up and doesn't recognize her. In the original script, when I say that acting's a tough job, and I've got friends who are actors, and they're scraping by on 5,000 or 6,000 a year, it's really tough. And I know, what's it like in movies? In the last film we did, what did you get paid? And in the first draft of the script, when we rehearsed it, she said $10 million. And then during rehearsals, she changed it. You know, she changed it to 12, and that was what we shot. And then it came to the third take of her close-up, and she suddenly said $15 million. And then we finished the scene, and I said, out of interest, how come you changed that? And she said, I was kind of tired of lowballing. And a week later, it was announced that she was getting 20 million for Erin Brockovich, you know, so.
Before we go, because she does come off as so charming, can you share the story, though, with the publicists and the
premiere? So we cut to a year later or so, and we're in London for the British premiere, which is the first of the premieres. And we haven't seen each other, and I'm standing with the group of friends in one corner of the party, and the show's gone really well, the premiere's gone really well in Leicester Square, and we're all convened at this beautiful orangery, and the lights are twinkling and the champagne's flowing, and she comes over and she sees us and she goes, hi, and we all, you know, hug and kiss, and nice to see you again. And she says, so you guys coming to the New York premiere next week? And we all sort of, you know, shuffled around and looked at our feet and said, well, actually, no, it hasn't really been mentioned. I think it's just you and Hugh, actually. And she goes, And so she went over and she intercepted one of the executive producers, who of course was thrilled that he was suddenly on the arm of Julia Roberts, being pulled across the party. And she came back, brought poor old, I can't remember which producer, anyway, it doesn't matter, brought him, Tim, back to us. And he said, hi, everyone, you know, good to see you. And she said, by the way, if these guys don't go to New York, I don't go to New York. And the next day, some poor, you know, intern had to ring us up and say, are you available to go to New York next week?
All right, so I must say, before we go, the ending of this book, which you'll all get to probably at about 4 o'clock this morning, because I know you're going to go home and not be able to put this thing down, is perfect. Chef's kiss. I mean, he really pulls it all together. So I would like to simply say, there is nothing better than a great conversation, and this is about the best we can get. So thank you so much.
Jim, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.